We at StoryCorps became very concerned about what's called affective polarization, toxic polarization in the country 5 or 6 years ago. So this is not a concern about arguing with each other, which is fine and healthy. It's about what happens when we start to see each other as less than human. And we were talking about Germany before the camera started rolling. Slavery, Nazi Germany, Hitler called Jews Untermenschen, less than human. Rwanda. I mean, you see this in Russia and the Ukraine now, referring to people as not human. Extremely dangerous. And the rate of toxic polarization in the U.S. across the divides has shot up. I mean, you've probably seen the statistics. There's some not small percentage of Republicans and Democrats who feel that the country would be better off if everybody in the opposite party was dead. And that is extremely dangerous. A democracy can't survive in a swamp of mutual contempt. And, we have real concerns, and I think that a lot of people have these concerns now about the future of our democracy. What are we going to do if we see our neighbors as our enemies? There are polls now that show that, we fear our neighbors more than our traditional, international adversaries, the Russians and the Chinese. It's just gone off the charts and it's out of control. So we developed this intervention, which we tested for 4 or 5 years, called One Small Step, which basically puts strangers from across the political divides together. They meet for the first time, not to talk about politics, but just to get to know each other as human beings under the premise that it's hard to hate up close. Our dream is to scale this thing across the country and to convince the country that it's our patriotic duty to see the humanity in people with whom we disagree. We were talking about, you had mentioned something that I said in another interview a while ago about this, multi-billion-dollar hate industrial complex. I mean, there are, in media and social media, there are billions of dollars being made getting us to hate each other. And, I'm very aware that One Small Step is a complete David and Goliath moonshot, but, we got to try something. Because the only thing we know for sure is that if this culture of contempt in the country wins, all of us are going to lose. So we're taking a crack at it.
It's interesting you talk about that industrial complex. I was in commercial broadcasting for years, and the consultants would come in and say, everybody loves the roller coaster ride, right? You're talking about fear, hatred, same thing as that roller coaster ride of what's coming around the bend next.
Yep.
Humans tend to thrive off of that.
Yeah.
But what I don't understand, you mentioned polling.
Yeah.
Americans approve of Congress 20%, disapprove 75%, and yet somehow Americans are identifying who they are through their politics.
Yeah, yeah. That indicates, loss of trust in institutions in general. I mean, our profession, journalism, has even lower numbers, 16, 17% from 80% in the 1970s, and it's all this fear and doubt that's being put into us. And, I think that roller coaster is hardwired into us. I mean, we are not that far away from who we were when we were in the caves. And, we are wired to be very responsive to threats. Obviously, that's how we survived. There's a lion over there. There's, a wolf that's going to eat you, not safety. So when people get our threat mechanism rolling, which is easy to do, you're going to pay much more attention to that than stories of who we actually are as Americans. When we've had 650,000 people participate in StoryCorps, the facilitators who go on the road and record, they're present for these interviews. They serve a year or two with StoryCorps, and they're with you and your dad when you make that recording. They call it bearing witness. And every one of them, when they come off the road, if you ask them what they've learned, they give a version of the Anne Frank quote that people are basically good. And, maybe there was, some sort of selection bias early on, but when you get into the hundreds of thousands, there's got to be a truth to it. So that is not what we see when we watch TV, but it is the truth, and I think that, we also know from polling, and we do a lot of, we're a hard organization, but we have a lot of science behind what we're doing with One Small Step. Most of the country falls into, there's a group called More in Common that has done a tremendous amount of polling around this. And, depending on how you cut the polling, about 85% of the country falls into the exhausted majority. They're sick of the divisions, they're scared, they're tired of this, and they want a way out. So we are trying to speak to the exhausted majority, remind them that there is a way out, and that what we're hearing from the various inputs that are coming into us are actually not true. And the truth is we have much more in common than divides us, and that if we listened more, and shouted less, we'd be a much stronger country, and that this is really dangerous. When you've got experts who have studied polarization around the world know that there are three things things that happen when you have a hyper-polarized society. One is political gridlock. The second is violence, which starts slowly and then goes quickly. And the third is like deep mental health problems because people lose hope. You don't know what to trust anymore, like you said. Trust in politics, trust in journalism, trust in medicine, trust in everything now. You know, nothing feels real anymore. Everything feels slippery. So again, total David and Goliath fight, but we just want to shake people on the shoulders and, you know, remind them this is what's real, this is what's important. And it's extraordinary to see what's happening in these One Small Step interviews. And everyone ends the same. People say, you know, at the end of these interviews, you know, people are scared going in, it takes courage, but you're with a stranger, and at the end, everyone, it almost belies belief. You know, let's have dinner. I want to exchange emails. Let's take a walk together. There's just this sense of relief when you realize that this person who you thought you should hate is just a person, just like you.
You have certain techniques with StoryCorps. You have a list of questions to kind of break through.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about a society that's being manipulated by a group who we don't trust very much.
Yeah.
How do we begin to have those conversations? If I want to have this with my friends and my neighbors, what are the techniques? Walk me through some of this.
Sure. What we do with One Small Step is purposefully not talk about politics. We haven't done this without the kind of very strict parameters of what happens in a One Small Step interview. One Small Step is built on one of the most studied theories in the history of psychology called contact theory, which was developed in the 1950s by a psychologist named Gordon Allport. And it says under very specific conditions, if you put two people together who think they're enemies and have them have a visceral experience with each other, at the end of that experience, that hate can melt away. In kind of the non-controlled experience of a One Small Step conversation, you're risking it, but it's worth it. And I think that the trick is to talk to people and listen to people you may not agree with. Again, we call it One Small Step because we don't talk about politics. Don't talk about politics. Talk about what matters to you. Ask questions, listen, and, you know, don't take the bait. Whatever you do, like, don't yell and just listen. This goes back to the origins of StoryCorps. People just want to be heard. They just want to be heard, they just want to be respected, and they just want to be treated with dignity. And you're 90% of the way there if you do that. So do get out of your bubble and sit with people. Again, we are not equipped to have people talk about politics, but just getting to know someone who's different than you, every time you're going to realize that your preconceived notions were wrong. And it doesn't have to be just across the political divides. There are many other situations where you kind of prejudge people. Could be around religion or whatever it is. And you just talk to them and you realize this guy could be my dad.
Well, you and I are roughly the same age.
Yeah.
We grew up in households where you didn't talk about your money,
right.
You didn't talk about religion,
right.
And you didn't discuss politics.
That's right.
It was kind of like the standard.
Yeah.
What's happened to us?
Yeah. I was hearing someone say that, you know, now you reconnect with someone from high school and like it's 100% about politics, you know, and you never talked about that. And again, this is being driven by social media, you know, and not only are we talking about politics, but both sides pick very obscure outlier, you know, issues and people, and that becomes what the kind of obsession that everybody focuses on. What StoryCorps does, I hope, is shakes us on the shoulder and reminds us what's important, and what's important are our families, you know, the people we love. The politics stuff is often small talk, and it's easy. You get brain chemicals like released when you have rage and fury and anger. But just try talking about your lives. Who was kindest to you in your life? How do you want to be remembered? Who was your dad? That sort of stuff, and see what happens. It's going to surprise you.
How do you become a better listener?
We've all got it in us, and none of us are perfect at it. I'm a terrible listener, you know, and I'm supposed to be the listening. All of us are terrible listeners sometimes, and all of us are good listeners sometimes. I mean, I think what it is just being focused on the person who's talking to you, not interrupting them, and some of the undergirding ideas of StoryCorps and public media, like none of us are the worst things we've ever done. Assume the best in others, and just be open, and incredible things are going to happen.
Dave Isay, founder of StoryCorps. One small step. It's not just a moonshot. You're going to make it happen, Dave.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.